Hey viewers, what's going on? Bloomerson here, and welcome back to another episode of Loadout. Now this week we have actually a really cool loadout, one that I was actually pretty proud with. This week we have a Django loadout. Now we haven't seen the very good Quentin Tarantino movie called Django Unchained. By the way, it's not the Django, this D is in fact silent. But I really recommend going to see the film. It is a badass movie. I watched it recently and I was actually inspired to do a class in Battlefield 4. Now, of course, I couldn't do a perfect loadout. The stuff they use in that movie is pretty old, and there isn't really too many of those guns left in the world in general, so it's very unlikely they're going to have them in a modern-day first-person shooter. But I was able to do something of a similar loadout that I was still pretty proud with, and I thought was actually quite close to some of the stuff they were using. Now I start off with an SVD DMR. That thing is completely stock, nothing on it, and honestly this was one of the hardest bits because there is nothing that looks like any of the rifles he uses. Now, well, first of all, he barely uses a rifle in the movie, but he does occasionally, and at the end he has a revolver with an extremely long barrel and a buttstock. Now I believe that's called a caravan revolver or a similar thing. I can't remember the exact name for them. I was researching them. I think they're very cool. Honestly, I'd like to see one in real life someday, just to believe it's actually a real thing and it's not just tricks of movie, because they are really weird, but are just so cool to look at. But we don't have one like those. We don't have one like that in Battlefield 4. So I was forced to use something similar. I went for the SVD just because it's sort of an old-looking rifle. Honestly, it was more of just a random choice. I mean, I could have gone with the SKS, but in the end, the SVD just had something a little bit more, and had more damage, which meant it more realistic to how the movie is. Now, along with that, I had a 44 Magnum, which is completely stock again, and this represents all the revolvers used. Now, most of the revolvers look pretty similar. They are sometimes different, but a lot of them are different to the 44 Magnum. First of all, the revolvers he uses in that movie, I believe, are snap forward ones. You actually go up, you grab the barrel, grab the pistol stock, and snap the gun, put the bullets in. This one actually has a chamber that comes out to the side, or a cylinder that goes out to the side. That's a more modern thing. Again, there isn't actually one that you can snap aside from the Rex, but it just doesn't look the same. Now for the gadgets, I went with a I went for a C4, and uses dynamite in the movie, and that's sort of what it represents. And in fact, this is actually one of the coolest parts of the loadout. But I also went with a ballistic shield right at the halfway point, right with the near the end of the movie, maybe 3/4 of the way through. There's a point where there's a huge shoot up, and Django ends up using a human shield of one of the thugs he's fighting. As used the body as a human shield. It's just actually a really cool scene. And weirdly, you don't see that kind of action scene in any kind of movie, I personally never seen one, but it's just a really good action scene. Even if you're not much a fan of action scenes, I'm sure there's some stuff in there that you can, sort of think, oh, that's pretty good. And in general, it's just a really good movie. Again, go and watch the movie. But definitely the best part of this order, I thought, was the 44 Magnum. I haven't really used this thing all too much in Battlefield 4. It never really was that good or that popular, but it is so good in Battlefield 3, and I just never really bothered to use it in Battlefield 4 because I had this weird trigger delay. You'd pull the trigger, the hammer would hit the bullet, and then the bullet would fire. Now that is a real life thing in revolvers, but unfortunately in Battlefield 4 it didn't translate too well. Having a game where you pull the trigger on a gun, but the gun doesn't actually fire until like a couple of milliseconds afterwards, that's not a really good gameplay feature, and honestly a lot of people complained about it, and I think they have either removed it or patched it so that it's an incredibly short time. Either way, it's definitely better. I'm not sure by how much, but it's definitely better, definitely improved. And overall, the revolvers are just much more fun and much easier to use now. I really hope in Hardline they don't ever bring this back for anything. Maybe they can have it in Hardcore, but please, in nothing else. Now, I was actually running the revolver as my main weapon doing this, because in the movie that is what you mainly use as a weapon during a lot of the action scenes. Honestly, one thing I didn't actually think of at the time was grenades. I used them quite a lot in this gameplay, and honestly I kind of should have removed them, because they don't actually appear in the game. You could argue that it's like throwing a stick of dynamite, which honestly you can, if he does that all too often in the movie. It's not a huge problem though. I mean, you can argue it's just a stick of dynamite, and that's your excuse, but it maybe was something I could have changed or removed. Now the SVD was 90% pointless. This thing was basically used for long range and nothing else. I can't really say too much about it. I hate DMRs, and maybe someday I'll actually find one I like, but at the moment I really hate them in Battlefield 4. Now, along with the ballistic shield, well, the ballistic shield was 100% useless. I never used it for anything good. Maybe once or twice I had a bit where I'd go down a corridor or something, but aside from that I never used it ever. But overall this loadout was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed doing this one. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video as well. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. If you have any loadouts, leave them down in the comments. Mine has been one soon, and I've seen some guys. This has been one soon. Out.